would say the number one question to ask yourself is, do I want to do business? Now, it does not have to necessarily be a very involved business. In 2023, there are many people that have multiple interests and side ventures and hustles. So I'm biased because I do enjoy this lifestyle, but I think that is the number one question to ask yourself is, do I want to get into business?
The whole healthcare industry is going to change dramatically in the next couple of years.
To chronic disease management and the preventative aspect of care.
AI can now understand the key clinical concepts of what's being verbalized in healthcare.
Welcome to Cherry Live. I'm Dr. Jordan Valrath, physician, entrepreneur, and Chief Medical Officer for Cherry Health. We're talking about Canadian healthcare. Join us as we speak to innovators, industry leaders, and people working to drive the health system forward. Evelyn Best is joining us today. She's a newly minted partnerships manager here at Cherry Health. Evelyn has been a registered dietitian since 2015 and is a seasoned private practice co-owner of Eatuitive Nutrition, a sports nutrition clinic that focuses on a data-driven approach to lifestyle intervention for optimal health via biometric testing and micro and macronutrient analysis. She's here today to share her journey and her insights in building a thriving private practice with multiple dietitians working at it. And we're going to chat a little bit about branching out on your own, that scary world of, should I do my own thing? Should I go work as a contractor, or should I stay an employee at my current job? So Evelyn, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so first off, why is dietitian so hard to spell? It seems like there should be a C there, but it's a T.
Yeah, there's actually a very interesting history to that. I believe the term dietitian was initially spelled with a C, and it was intended to be a physician specialist that specializes in nutrition and dietetics. But I suppose things have changed, and the field of dietetics with the T was somehow sprouted, and that has just stuck. So I'm not entirely sure, but it is an interesting for sure.
Fascinating. I was not expecting a real answer to that question. Very cool. Why don't you start by telling us a bit about your background? What's the clinic like, Eatuitive? Tell us more there.
Yeah, so I got my degree from the University of Alberta, and I went through the integrated dietetics program at the U of A. And so when I first graduated, of course, there was a hiring. So that was sort of the initial thing that prompted me to look outside the box and create some opportunities, some means of making an income, as there were not a lot of job postings that were available. And so I began my career as I did a short stint as a long-term care clinical dietitian. And then I accepted a position with medical nutrition in the kind of pharmaceutical world, where my first job was actually selling to dietitians in account and territory sales management. And this wasn't necessarily the road that I thought I was going to go down, but it was something that provided like a lot of value in my growth as a professional, learning the basics in terms of sales and business, developing business acumen. And it was a great opportunity that I spent at Nestle Health Science over the course of 1 year, where I covered a maternity leave, and I was given the opportunity to continue. But as a new grad, as a new professional, I had other aspirations and ideas that I really wanted to pursue. And so I decided, you know what, let me give this a go. And so I joined forces with a primary care clinic and started contracting out some services as a registered dietitian. So that was my first road into private practice dietitian. And that was also the time in 2016 that was Eatuitive Nutrition was born. And so over the course of a number of years, that's when I built the practice, starting to niche down and figure out the target clientele that we wanted to serve. And then, here we are in 2023, and it's still going strong.
Awesome. So you were doing contracting then through another clinic before for a couple years, it sounds like, until you decided to
Mhm.
fully branch out and run your own practice at that point. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
What tipped you over the edge? What made you want to say, okay, I can do this better myself?
Yeah. Well, it's hard to say if there was a specific point in time. Um, but ultimately I would say it's more so just going for it. Um, since I guess the road into entrepreneurship in 2016, more so in partnership with other clinics, individuals, companies. It until about 2018. 2018 was when I really took the plunge and decided to do it more independently. And I think it was a good approach to private practice, given the fact that I wanted to gain more experience as well. I like people. This is also why I am now the partnerships manager at Cherry, is because I really, during this journey, realized how much I just love technology and innovation and wanted to find an avenue, a channel where I could have more impact in that way. And so that was also part of the reason to partner with others. And there's a lot to learn from other organizations, other practitioners that are not dietitians, more of an interdisciplinary approach. So ultimately, the big shift is just, mentally deciding, all right, I am ready and I'm going to go for it. And it's almost like a switch that um, was flipped in my mind, and there it was.
Taking the plunge. Yeah. So it sounds like
Yeah.
being a, more techie person, kind of an early adopter in that realm, probably kind of pushed you towards doing your own thing, right? Then you're not stifled or held back by, whoever might be managing things that isn't as tech inclined or ready to adopt those next things. So that's super cool. So
Mhm.
we'll chat a little bit about that, making that branch out, doing your own thing then. Who would this information be applicable to then? Obviously, dietitians. Are there any other like facets of allied health or physicians even? Are we allowed to say
Mhm.
allied health? Somebody told me that's like a pejorative term recently. Is
Really?
this like a common thing in the healthcare world, or is
That's
that
huh,
just the word for other healthcare practitioners?
interesting. Well, um, I personally do like the term allied health, and it is a term that I use. Um, I guess maybe I didn't get the memo. So,
I
um,
just don't have a better word for it, so I
oh,
continue
I
using it.
I like it. I like it. Yeah, that's a great question. This would certainly be applicable for dietitians, and I would also say it would be applicable for physicians. There are definitely areas that I would not consider that are probably not applicable to the profession of dietetics. I think there's a lot of transferable considerations that can be adapted to various professions, and this may also apply for um, other types of small businesses. I would say this would likely be more applicable for those that are doing consulting, a service based business. This would be so, besides dietitians, I would say, for example, if you are a physiotherapist, a massage therapist, um, that would be applicable to that. Psychology, any behavioral health interventionists, this would be applicable to.
A lot of these outpatient community practitioners, I guess, sort of across the board.
Definitely, more
Cool.
so in the outpatient space for sure.
Okay. So, what are the considerations ahead of time? You're thinking about it. You're like, should I go do my own thing? What do you got to consider? What are those like first things you have to ask yourself to figure out, okay, should I seriously pursue this and start putting together that business plan?
Yeah. So I would say the number one question to ask yourself is, do I want to do business? Now, it does not have to necessarily be a very involved business. In 2023, there are many people that have multiple interests and side ventures and hustles. So I'm biased because I do enjoy this lifestyle, but I think that is the number one question to ask yourself is, do I want to get into business? Because let's face it, even if the commitment to said side venture only takes 5 hours a week, let's say, it is still considered self employment activity in the eyes of the CRA or in any jurisdiction that you may be in. And so, in order to be compliant with the law, there are some processes that one has to follow. Now, it does not mean that it's very involved. In Alberta, and I believe likely also in Canada, one can operate as a sole proprietor, which means you don't need to be incorporating a company that you may or may not know if you will be continuing on with in the future, and you can operate as a sole proprietor. But that does mean you need to have a way to track your income and associated expenses. Uh, there may be a need to obtain a business license depending on the field that you're in. You may have to remit taxes in the form of GST and HST for certain health providers. I know this does apply for massage therapists. Some regulated health providers are, um, I don't know the exact term, is either zero rated or exempt. So these are the kinds of questions that would be important to consider and likely consult a professional. Look for a certified accountant, and that's yet another piece as well. Is um, we tend to succeed by working with others, so there will be a need to also consult with other professionals to make your own venture a success. So that would be the number one question. Am I
So a
ready to
lot
do
of
business?
like pain in the butt behind the scenes things that you got to deal with, right? Like all these
Yeah.
housekeeping items, your taxes, your corp documents, your minute book, all this stuff that, yeah, I really do, now that I'm on the other side of running a business, see a lot of the benefits of just being a salaried T4 employee and you just show up for your hours and then go home again afterwards. You don't have to think about anything else.
Yeah. Definitely. And I have to say, I am definitely enjoying this piece being a cherry now. The taxes are slightly less confusing as they were before.
This show is brought to you by Cherry Health, Canada's medical network where healthcare practitioners connect. Physicians, pharmacists, chiropractors, dentists, and all other allied healthcare professionals can sign up for free and start checking out job opportunities from thousands of employers across Canada. We make it easy to advance your career with industry-specific job filters to help find your dream job or line up your next locum. You can also post jobs for free. That's right, if you're a clinic owner, manager, or a recruiting professional, you can recruit doctors and other healthcare providers for $0. No catch, hundreds of new health jobs posted every week. www.cherry.health to get started today. Okay, so you're taking the plunge, you've thought about it, you're ready for the extra workload, you think the benefits of it are going to outweigh the amount of extra work necessary. What do you got to actually get in place now that you're going to be setting up your own dietary or other type of healthcare provider outpatient business, like in terms of seeing patients, in terms of your day-to-day workflow? Now you're responsible for setting up all your own operations, getting all your software, your tech stack, your patient acquisition marketing funnel. Like where do you start?
Yeah, that's a lot. And you're definitely right that these are all important considerations. Yet we also need to stay focused in what it is that we're looking to achieve. So to get started, the first thing is to have your business registered. So if one plans to operate under their own name. So let's say for myself, I want to simply operate as Evelyn Best. My understanding, and this is definitely something you want to check with your accountant and your local registry.
This does not represent legal advice.
No financial or legal advice here. But through my experience, that you don't actually need to register a name per se. But however, let's say you want to operate as Cherry Health, and regardless of whether or not it is incorporated or not, this is now considered a trade name, and therefore you do need to go into your local registry or other channels that's required to let them know, hey, I am going to be operating as Cherry Health. And it's not too expensive. And maybe this is a little out of date because I did it in 2016, but I think it was like $70 or $85 here in Alberta. And
Not
then
bad.
that's it. Like now the government knows, okay, Evelyn is working on this, and now you need to start tracking your income and expenses. So it can be as simple as you have a spreadsheet and you just log your income and expenses. And it may not be a bad idea to open a separate account just for business activities. So it can be as low cost as $5 a month to open such an account. And when you're operating as a sole proprietor, the CRA or IRS or whomever your jurisdiction's regulatory body is for that considers you and the trade name as one entity. And so you just need to mark that. You may still have employment income. And so there is just one additional form. It's a T something form that you have to fill out at the time that you file your taxes. And of course, because you're receiving income from other sources, there's no taxes being deducted. So you need to keep that into consideration as well, and just have, the side money. So when your tax bill comes, there's no surprises and you're able to fulfill your tax obligations.
So in terms of getting those T's crossed and I's dotted, do you need to set up like any kind of extra insurance while you're at it? Like, do dietitians have malpractice insurance like we do in the medical world as well? How does that actually work? Is there any, and if so, is there any difference there once you're now a contractor or doing it yourself versus when you're working for somebody?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the dietetic profession, yes, we do have liability insurance. I believe the typical requirement is $1 to $2 million liability per incident or something along those lines. And my understanding is with employers, they may or may not have their own insurance. So regardless of whether or not you are going to branch off on your own, hey, maybe for curiosity, that's something to investigate a little bit further. And I do know that certain employers require even of employees to purchase their own liability
That makes
insurance,
sense.
and sometimes they reimburse it, sometimes they do not. So that's a discussion to have. With the dietetic profession, I'm aware of two ways of obtaining this liability insurance. One is through the Dietitians of Canada, and the other way, I just know of a couple of, I suppose, insurance brokers. So Hub, I believe it's called, is a popular one as well. Um, I've always just gone through Dietitians of Canada, and I cannot remember who they go through, but it's easy. Every year when I renew my membership, I just pay the extra $100, and I'm good to go. So
Makes sense. Okay. And then how do you process payments, I guess? What is the next step then? Do you need to get a terminal like they have at a restaurant, or how does that actually work?
you can. So when it comes to payment processing, if you're just getting started and you anticipate just a small number of clients or patients or whomever you'll be providing services to, you don't necessarily have to. You do have the option of receiving e-transfers, for example, in Canada is quite common as a way of receiving payments. And again, just making sure that you're tracking that. The good news too, though, is if you want to accept credit card payments, it is not difficult to set up. There are industry leading providers such as Stripe, Square, and then I suppose through your financial institution, you can get those as well. As you get started, probably the best bet is to go with some of those e commerce providers like Stripe or Square. There is a processing fee that's involved, so that's something to keep in mind. It's usually approximately 3% gross. So if you're charging $100, you're probably only getting about 97.
Okay.
And that can add up. But if you're in a service-based industry, it's really just the cost of doing business, and we our margins, I suppose, in some very competitive industries, their margins might only be like 5 to 10%, right? So if you're in such an industry, then you might want to rethink the way that you accept payments, and to like how are you going to price things? Are you going to work that into the cost itself, or is there an added cost for your consumer? So those are some things to think about. But as you get started, keep it simple. Could be e-transfer, it could be hard cash, it could be a check. But definitely credit card is something that a lot of people do expect. But there is just that fee involved. But it shouldn't take you more than say a half hour to set that up if you were to go with one of those providers, e-commerce providers that I mentioned.
Okay, so you've got your accounting plan, you've got your payments figured out. What do you use for your patient charting software for your health records? What do you actually do there?
Yeah.
What do most dietitians or other providers use?
Yeah, so that is definitely the next piece to consider. So most regulatory bodies have the requirement that you need to keep your records for say 5 years, 10 years. So as you get started, again, if you're not necessarily anticipating a large volume, you can use pen and paper. You can have a Dropbox account, a Google Drive. You can have a good old fashioned hard disk that perhaps you back up just for the fail safe. But it is definitely a good idea to be investing in some form of electronic health records system. So but I would say even prior to the electronic health record system, something to consider is scheduling. As you get started, it's probably not a big deal to be exchanging emails with your prospect to find a time that works. However, in this day and age, we want things fast. We want to self-serve, and so looking into a scheduling tool. I have no affiliation with these providers, but like Calendly, for example, Acuity scheduling, and there's a lot out there that's available is a good idea. And a lot of these scheduling tools do integrate quite well with the payment tools and also EMR or EHR systems that you may be using. So I think that's the first thing is figure out a way to get paid, and to figure out a way to get your patients and your clients on to your calendar and making it easy to make changes.
Makes sense. Yeah, so my wife, for her cosmetics practice, she's using the Jane EMR. I don't know if you've actually seen that one before, but that one actually is pretty slick for, there's no lab reports or diagnostic imaging. It doesn't really connect with any other systems. It's just sort of your in-house, but it's got that scheduling built into it. I think it processes payments too. It works for
Yeah.
your charting and note taking. That I actually found pretty slick. I don't know if you've seen that before.
Yeah, Jane is definitely a common one that many people use. It does look pretty slick. I do like it. It does connect with Stripe. I've used Acuity scheduling in the past. This does integrate with Squarespace. So Squarespace is a website builder that's quite commonly used. It's quite user friendly. So that's also another consideration that we'll talk a little bit more about is how do you market your services? How do you go through that process of client acquisition. Um, so yeah, Jane is a good one. Acuity is the one that I've used a lot, and I quite like it. It can be quite sophisticated down the road of how like you have different service types. Some are in person, some are virtual. Perhaps you only want to do in person on Monday and Tuesdays, and then Wednesday to Fridays all virtual. You can set those things. You can set limits. There's SMS reminders at a certain tier of payments, and rescheduling stuff like basic intake forms even are available within Acuity and Jane, to my knowledge. But these are more so your scheduling tools that can help you to get started. But as your practice becomes more mature and there's need for other features, then yes, looking into an EHR, EMR is a very good idea, and it becomes more of a centralized place to keep your records and possibly also provide some value to your clients as well.
Well, and so maybe the next thing that would make sense to dig into would be where are you working? What kind of space are you setting up? Maybe you're going all virtual because that'll probably dictate what your digital presence is, whether you have a website, what your marketing funnel looks like for finding those
Mhm.
customers going to be widely different if you're virtual versus in one spot versus another. So how do you decide on where you actually want to set up shop? What goes into that assessment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this question, there's two ways of thinking about it. There's your personal circumstance and what works better for you as an individual and as a professional, and your other obligations in life. So that's one consideration. And the other consideration is from a client perspective. What is it that they are looking for? Now, of course, there are many different customer, client, patient segments that a business can go after, but that's also a consideration. And so in 2023, virtual health services are much more widely accepted than in, let's say, 1983, right? So that's the good news. If you want to set up a virtual practice, the pro to that would be there's reduced overhead, there's the flexibility of space, but there's the downside of, well, if the way that you are personally choosing to operate this practice is from home, there may also be that additional blurred lines between your home life and your professional life. And everyone's tolerance for that is different. So you have to decide that for yourself.
This show is brought to you by Cherry Health, Canada's medical network where healthcare practitioners connect. Physicians, pharmacists, dentists, chiropractors, and all other allied healthcare professionals can sign up for free and start checking out job opportunities from thousands of employers across Canada. We make it easy to advance your career with industry-specific job filters to help find your dream job or line up your next locum. You can also post jobs for free. That's right, if you're a clinic owner, manager, or a recruiting professional, you can recruit physicians and other healthcare providers for free. There's no catch, $0, hundreds of new health jobs posted every week. www.cherry.health to get started today. What was Eatuitive? Is that virtual or is it a brick and mortar facility?
It's a hybrid practice. When it started, it was, and still to this date, it has more of a in-person presence. And part of the reason is our unique value proposition being based on data as well as biometric testing. And so, because biometric testing is involved, this is not something that can be done virtually, and therefore a space was required. So, but then once the testing is done and we have the required data, there's not always a need for an in-person consult to be done, and people also appreciate the flexibility. So, we do Zoom, we do Google, we do phone consults. So it's a bit of a hybrid practice, just depending on the circumstance.
Okay, so let's say somebody decides they're going to go for the brick and mortar. They want to have an actual
Mhm.
space where they could see their clients or patients. Um, how do you make the choice there? Do you set up shop somewhere turnkey where you're paying overhead and they've already got a lot of things set up? Do you rent your own space where your name's on the lease and now you're starting from scratch? What kind of considerations are there?
Yeah, so all of the above are options. I believe nowadays, oftentimes we might just want to dabble in it and see if this is something we want to invest more time and energy on. And so, in these instances, to trial it, let's say, maybe a good idea to one, partner with another individual, another practitioner that's in a parallel or a same field as you, with a clinic, with another business, and negotiate either a flat rate, or possibly a percentage split if there is a greater overlap in the services that are being provided. And the decision to go either a flat rate or a percentage split depends on a number of things. Um, I personally am more for the flat rate because it's just cleaner. You get a bill every month, you pay it. There tends to be more autonomy and freedom, and you still have the ability, if you so choose, to collaborate with your landlord, so to speak, on other initiatives if you'd like. If you choose to go the percentage split route, sometimes that can come with some unexpected administration. Like, how do we know if we got paid the $200 consulting fee? What about the credit card consulting fee? Do I now have to send an invoice that varies in amounts every month? And so this is then a discussion between yourself and whomever you're deciding to go down that path with.
What would be like a typical split for that overhead cost in the dietitian world or the psychologist world? So, in the physician world, we usually do the, I don't know, 70/30, I'd say is pretty standard for
Mhm.
overhead, right? And so it makes sense versus the flat rate, right? Because every extra patient you see, that's another tongue depressor. There's more office supplies. It's taking the nurse's time to check
Yes.
them in and the MOA versus like what are the supports even, I guess, for a dietitian working in a practice like that? Is it as closely linked to the patient volume or is it more that's why the flat rate makes sense because it doesn't really cost
Mhm.
the clinic or the facility more to see more patients?
It really can be both. And I've seen both ways being done very well and both ways being done not as well. And so, starting with the percentage split discussion, um, of course, there is a cost to operations for whomever is providing you with the space to conduct business. And therefore, they should be compensated for giving you that resource. And so I would say for just the use of the space, 20% to them, so 80/20 would be reasonable if the only support provided is the space itself. However, if you are considering to partner with another clinic, let's just use a clinic as an example here, they may have additional value adds. Perhaps this is a rather mature clinic that already has the Jane, the acuity, the EMR that suits your needs already in place. So that would be truly a turnkey situation. Then I would say that you may want to consider providing a higher split to the clinic because they are providing additional support. So with that, I would say that 70/30 or so is reasonable if there are some level of support provided. Um, and even 60/40, like 60/40 is definitely a higher split to the clinic. But if they provide exceptional support, if they have the numbers and the track record to show that they are successful, maybe they have some form of guarantee or promise that they can show you that, look, if you come to us, the likelihood of you getting this amount of client load is quite likely to happen, then you may decide that that suits you in that situation. The most important thing when you're considering the value adds that a certain clinic may provide you is whether or not it suits your needs as a professional for the field that you're in, and whether or not that suits the needs and wants of your customer base and your client base, your patient base, because there may very well be a lot of overlap, or there may not. And so sometimes what we perceive or expect to happen doesn't always happen that way. And so it's good to just spend a little bit of time considering what that alternative might look like, and find a mutually beneficial agreement between the two parties.
And then on the patient acquisition side, how did you choose to do it with Eatuitive? Where do patients come from? It's very foreign to me as a family doctor. There's
Mhm.
infinite patients. There's never going to be a shortage of patients. You don't have to put any effort into finding
Mhm.
patients. They just show up. Even if you're not looking for patients, they appear. If you're
Mhm.
in that private practice model, where do the patients come from? How did you set up your marketing funnel?
Yeah, so in terms of client acquisition, this is definitely the biggest challenge for a lot of allied health professionals. And when I say allied health professionals, I guess I'm also somewhat referring to those professionals where it may be much more likely to be private pay, so not covered by your provincial health authority. And so it becomes a lot more business based in that realm. It's not like working a um, at a clinic in an outpatient setting where, like you said, patients just show, and um, and we just do the work that we've been trained to do in school. So, in terms of client acquisition, it is the biggest challenge. You have to think about how you're going to get them. Some people like to do online marketing, so whether that's Facebook, Instagram. Some people are more focused on a referral network through professional networking events. I would say the professional networking event kind of method to acquiring clients is more common in the past, whereas now in the digital age, it's a lot more DIY versus in the past. Now, I have seen some practitioners that have been vastly successful utilizing more so of a referral network, but it tends to require a fairly involved relationship with other businesses. So it's a long sales cycle, I would say, if you were to go down that path, but that may also be rewarding. So the way that for Eatuitive, for the sports nutrition practice, that we were able to acquire clients, I went more of the DIY route. I've certainly done um, the networking, but not a focused effort on those, because it's very easy to get sucked down the rabbit hole of Facebook and Instagram. So I I wouldn't even say I really tried it, because it's more so I have an account and I might post something once in a blue moon. The way that we went about it was more so through search engine optimization. I was focusing on the low hanging fruit, um, focusing on those clientele that are already ready to buy. They are ready to see a dietitian within the next month, let's say, and figuring out how to build a website, how to have the language within the website that aligns with your client base, the problems that they're trying to solve. So that's the route that I went down. And then, now you've got all your website and all the nice things all set up from a business, like, your registration, all those things sorted. How do you get it in front of people? And then I went down the rabbit hole of search engine optimization. How you, get closer to that front page of Google, and then went from there.
Yeah, who built your website? Was it you yourself, or did you wind up having to find a contractor or outsourcing it?
Oh man, a little bit of both. At first, it was definitely done by myself. We have hired a number of individuals or marketing companies over the years to help us with that. Because let's face it, I'm not an expert in web development or design by any means. Um, but to this date is still more so DIY. But I would suggest getting some help there, because otherwise you're also down a rabbit hole. Doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to have the key pieces of information and connect with your target audience. And so, really figuring out who this target audience is would be my next advice, is to think about who you want to serve, to niche down to a level. And it doesn't have to be a very, very specific, super specific niche. But oftentimes, when we try to speak to everyone, then the message can get a little bit diluted, and that may affect your conversion rate. So, something to think about, in tech and startup, we call it the ideal client profile, the ICP. So, think about who they are and what it is that they're looking to solve, and how does your solution and how does the existing interventions out there, the competitive landscape look? And what's your unique value proposition? Is there a gap? And how do you bridge that gap? How do you get them to say yes? That is the biggest piece. So that's the business aspect that really does come in.
How long after you got going with Eatuitive? You started it up, you incorporated, found your clinic, started marketing, all that. How long after when you got going were you like, okay, this was a good idea? Things are now stable and I'm less worried. The
Yeah.
existential threat of things falling apart is starting to fade out. Was it a month, a year, a couple years? When did you actually start feeling comfortable in it?
Yeah, I'd say a couple years. It officially started in 2016. At the time, it was very much a side hustle. It was more so I came up with a name and I'm like, I want to keep that name. And I went and registered it. But for the first 6 months, there wasn't a lot happening within the business itself, but it was officially registered. And then once we really got going, I would say about 2 years, looking at the books of income and expenses, certain investments that may not have, panned out in the way that you had hoped. And that's another thing too. You will have some misses, and that's okay. That is just a part. That's just the journey. I view it as tuition. How many like multi five figures that we spent on our degrees, right? So what's a few $100s? What's even a few $1,000, if it helps to speed up your process? So do not be discouraged if there are certain investments, or courses or time that you spend in certain initiatives that don't work out. It's going to happen, and that does develop our grit and our character. But I'd say about 2 years, and that was that timing of 2018 where I felt, you know what, this is looking pretty good. Like maybe I don't need to be contracting out my services with other individuals or clinics. Like, and I still continue to, even um, until very recently, to have some consulting work on the side. There's some partners that have served me very, very well. But just to kind of just streamline it a little bit, instead of, at one point I probably have 5 or 6 jobs, right? Just to make various sources of income. And it's like, well, maybe I will focus on these two that align with my mission and vision, as opposed to being in different directions.
And then what was your worst day ever as an entrepreneur? Was there a time when the whole thing almost blew up or you're just not having fun with it?
Yeah, I guess I don't know if this is the specific day, but I think a lot of people can probably relate to that. In March 2020, when all of a sudden, things are being shut down, and, we're supposed to stay home. We have no idea if the entire world is going to just be flipped on its head and what's going to happen. So that was definitely a shock, given that um, the practice that we have is more of a hybrid practice that does have that in-person component. Now, the good news is there is that virtual component as well. And so just quickly pivoted. and focused more on the virtual aspects, kept a waiting list for the in-person pieces, and went from there. So definitely took a little bit of a hit, as most people did. But it was something that wasn't that we definitely recovered from.
No, that's good. That's good.
Mm.
Okay, awesome. Well, is there any other final advice you'd have for the budding healthcare entrepreneurs out there?
Go for it. If this is what you want to do,
YOLO.
oftentimes, entrepreneurs, small business owners, whether from a very small scale to very large scale, when you ask them for advice, they just say, "Hey, just get started." Their regret is not having gotten started earlier, and it's sometimes it can feel challenging, and it's not as structured, and doesn't necessarily have that blueprints and roadmap as other paths, but it can also be very rewarding. And what's the worst that could happen? And go for it.
Right on. So, if anybody's looking to get in touch with Eatuitive, where can they find you?
If you Google Dietitian Calgary, you'll be able to hopefully find us
Number
fairly
one on
top.
the SEO.
Hopefully. But you are able to email us at hello@eatuitivenutrition.com, and it's EATUITIVE nutrition.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Evelyn, for joining us today. It was really insightful. Appreciate you taking the time.
No problem. Thank you for having me.